Hi, welcome back to CS170 fall session. So we're in sort of a transition here. We're in the week where we have uh, basically the new topics, the new areas that we're going to cover. So basically, it's going to be kicking off with algorithms, flowcharts, pseudocode, and starting to get you into JavaScript. Probably many of you are focused on like what's on exam one. So you can kind of take this in, but then you're going to probably review it a little bit later on, and you probably spend your time more focused on the beginning part. So the beginning parts that's going to be on the exam, really your HTML, your numeric conversions, kind of like the whole processing, CPU processing that we did last week, um, the levels of abstraction, talking about the the different kind of like computer history type of stuff that we talked about at the beginning of semester. So all of that is gonna be on there. And then there's also the bit about like digital, right? So digital media, where you can have pictures. What does it mean to have the different types of compression, lossless versus lossy type of compression? The trade-off, obviously, in terms of the quality of the picture versus how much space it takes up. Sound, right? How often do you sample the sound, and how, what is the bit depth on it? So obviously, the bigger the number, the better. But again, there's a trade-off in terms of how much space you take up. With pictures, if I want to make the picture brighter or darker, I want to add color to it, I want to add more contrast to it. Those are the type of things you want to understand. You understand for the pictures, you have this idea of pixels, red, green, blue, and how much space does that take up? You're talking in terms of like 8 bits or into a byte, and be able to calculate how many bytes, let's say, a picture takes up. And then, really, when you look at videos is just really kind of pictures adding that third dimension there. So you're just kind of taking each of those pictures and multiplying by however many frames you have to create that video. So, very quickly, what I just mentioned there is probably all the things that you really want to make sure you hit on. If you don't understand those concepts, make sure you do, because they're going to be on the exam. And then I think I kind of point out something that kind of trips up a lot of people for some reason is, the mouse, right? Remember the difference between who invented the mouse and who actually bought it to market for personal computing. They're two different things. It seems like we get a lot of people that mix that up every year with the exam. So make sure you get that clear in your head. Yeah, so if any of those topics you have problems with, do make sure you drop into the lab hours during this week. Cover each of those topics. It's important. Everything I just mentioned there will be on the exam. There should be some sample exam to go out there. If you've been doing the quizzes, it kind of lines up pretty well with that. And then one thing I'm going to kind of get into is the idea of the absolute and relative path. I know we covered it in lecture, but I think some people kind of had some confusion on that. And you do need to know that for submitting your assignments and making sure your images pop up properly. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much more time talking all that stuff. I'll just kind of let it go. If you have questions, send out emails to the TAs or myself. Oh, one other thing, as I mentioned before, like the TAs are the ones that really handle the grading, right? Whether it's your assignments, whether it's your quizzes, whether it's like your midterms and whatnot. I'll help facilitate if there's a problem. But ultimately, if you have question about like using your free late, or you have question about a particular answer that you don't think is correct or whatever, you want to talk to your TAs, because they're the ones that's actually looking at your assignment and grading them. Okay. I mean, if there's a disagreement or whatever, I'll step in to facilitate. So do make sure you reach out to them, because if you ask me, I'm just going to turn right around and direct you back to the TA, and sort that out with them. They're the ones that track your grades and manage them. Okay. So let's get right into it a little bit. Okay. So you remember the sample HTML, which I had you mess around with for extra credit before. Okay, so you have all of this, right? So there seems to be some confusion from I get a number of questions about this. So I do want to bring this up in the lecture, is the idea of the absolute and relative path. So there was a number of people that sent me HTML with pictures, like local pictures essentially on their computer, and it doesn't work. Well, I mean, it's not going to work because you didn't send me the picture, right? So I just want to kind of distinguish between a picture that is available, quote unquote, out on the internet, right? So it's out there somewhere, versus a picture that's on your local computer, let's say. So in this case, you remember this one, right? This is the R, right, for Rutgers. So this was like what a lot of you use as part of your extra credit. So let me get back to here. And so this is something that's quote unquote, it's out there on the internet, right? So you can see the address here, right? It's Senate Rutgers edu, blah, blah. This is like the file system there. Now, you have to spell it out like this, because this is quote unquote not on your computer, right? You're going to their website, okay? And so what this means is like, for me to not know where something is, I have to spell out the path, right? Quote unquote, the whole path, okay? And so that's what they mean by absolute path, right? Forget about this 7x, blah, 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 whatever. They can call it whatever they want. And so that's what we had to call it, or what I had to call it when I loaded this up, okay? But the idea here is this is the full path to get to it, because you're going to someone else's computer, okay? So you need to find out how to get to that file. And that's why you have this quote unquote, the whole path here. And that's where you get the R from. Now, to contrast that, this is where we get into relative path, okay? Now, when you submit your assignment, you're gonna submit like a zip file. The zip file will have your HTML file, right? .html, and any local pictures that you may have, okay? Now, the easiest thing to do is kind of just like have everything sitting in your local folder, right? Wherever you have your sample HTML. I call it sample HTML. Most times when you do like a website or whatever, it's called index HTML. But anyway, that I'm kind of going off the rails there. So anyway, so I have a picture here. And now what I want you to notice is first there is like this / and then car. Okay, and then I just put the name of the picture here. Okay, so what this says is that wherever you have your HTML, that particular folder has another subfolder called car, right? And that's why you call it ./car. Okay, and then within that car folder, you just have to have this picture here, right? And so this is what it looks like here. All right, so I have some samples here. This is where my sample here is. And then look, I have a folder car here. But you look, this is a subfolder of wherever, right? Now, obviously, when you send this HTML file to me, I'm not on your computer. I have no idea like where the heck is your folders at, right? You could have a C drive, you could have it on a D drive or whatever, right? So you're telling me that wherever I open this, there better be a folder called car, and then within the car folder, there should be a picture, okay? And so ultimately, let's say I open this up here, right? So you remember this, right? There's all the sample here from before. All I did was just added in the picture over here, okay? Now, when you do this, like I said, if you just send me an HTML file without the folder, without the picture of the car, I'm gonna get like some like nondescript type of thing, which means that I can't load up your picture. Okay, so what you want to do is make sure you include your zip folder. You're going to have what should I say, the car folder, the car folder, and then the JPEG that's inside of it. Okay, And let's say for the sake of argument that I was going up a bit. Let me see, I go up a bit, right? And so, I go to here actually, right? So you have all of these folders here and whatnot. So you kind of went up a level, right? Before I was at HTML, right? So that was a subfolder here. So all of this stuff here, like your computer, your desktop, your HTML folder, I know nothing about that, right? So when you send it to me, you can stick it in, I'll stick it into like ABC folder, let's say, right? So, that's why when you send it to me, probably you would send it like looking down, meaning that you would send it with a car folder, let's say. You probably wouldn't go up, but let's say for the sake of argument, you're not sending it to anyone else, you're just kind of working within your own setup, then you might say, oh, maybe instead of a subfolder, I want to go up a little bit, right? And then you kind of want to go shifting up a little bit, okay? So that's how you kind of go up. So there's the idea, I think you remember, I forgot which lecture it was, but basically the tree structure, right? So how do you go down the tree? How do you go up the tree to refer to the different folders and then the files within them? So make sure you go back to that slide and just study that, make sure you understand that and understand why when you send us the assignment, you have to send us the JPEG file, you have to send us like, if you happen to have subfolders or whatever, you have to include that all as part of your zip file along with the HTML, okay? Like I said, there was a number of people that had some problems with that when they were sending me the extra credit. So I just want to make sure you understand that because that's an important thing to understand for the exam, okay? Absolute and relative path. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much more time on this. Let's get on with the lecture. So here we are. So at the beginning of the lecture, just a quick reference. I mean, you guys have seen all of this, but HTML, that's going to be what's on the first exam. All of these different tags here, you really should try to understand, at least conceptually, what they mean, right? I'm not going to read them all out to you, but take a look at all of these and make sure you understand what's happening when you use these tags here. And then, just like the last week's extra credit, we were talking about like tables, lists, right? The different types of lists, and how you can nest the lists within each other. You can nest stuff within a table also. Those are the type of things that you definitely will see in the exam. What we're showing you is the individual components, and then how you nest them and put them together is something that you want to try on your own and make sure you understand how to do that. Okay, because it's probably going to be on your exam. We'll probably have something on there and say, oh, here's a table, and here's the caption for it. Here's the table header. We're going to embed a very short list in there. Maybe show me the HTML that's going to generate that. Okay, so think about that. And like I said, a lot of you kind of did something like that for the extra credit, so you understand what I'm talking about in terms of nesting things. So do think about that. It's probably going to be on your exam. If you don't understand that, make sure you let your TA know, you let me know, okay? Play around with it. That's what you should be doing on your browsers, okay? You remember the escape symbol? That was part of what I kind of demonstrated over here, right? So I was able to show this, and it doesn't get confused between printing this as text versus interpreting this as an H1 tag, okay? All right, so chapter 10, algo thinking, right? I'm probably want to break this up into multiple videos this week. So I want to try to keep it fairly short and then do the other parts of this video into a separate lecture, or maybe 2 lectures, depending how far we go, okay? So I think I mentioned this like almost at the beginning of the semester, talking about algo or algorithms, right? And I kind of refer to it like in last week's lecture, talking about, cooking stuff, right? You have a recipe, right? So your recipe is your algorithm, right? And then, we kind of related to the whole fetch, decode, execute cycle where, I had stuff that's in remote storage, which is like the refrigerator. I pull the ingredients out, right, which is kind of like getting like the different elements and, using the recipe to figure out what I'm going to be doing on the cutting board, which is your local workspace, right? That has your registers, which is your high-speed local memory, and you're doing your work on it, right? So algorithm, that's part of it, right? So it's your recipe to do whatever it is that you want to do. Okay. And so what happens within the algorithm? Well, you have some input. Remember, like the ingredients from the refrigerator. The output, maybe I'm making a pizza or something, right? Definiteness, right? I don't really think that's a word, but I guess that's what it is. And all that means is like a discrete output or discrete answer. It's not like a shade of gray. Let's put it this way. It's either black or it's white, right? There's something discrete that comes out. It's not like not quite like a wishy-washy type of thing. Like I said, it's a shade of gray. You don't want to have that, right? That's usually what these algorithms are looking for, right? And then effectiveness and finiteness, okay? Finiteness means like it really shouldn't be going into an infinite loop, right? So you go into like some sort of logic error and then, it just keeps on spinning around forever, right? And then the idea of heuristic process, flowcharts, and pseudocode, all right? So let's get cracking with this, okay? So yeah, programs are algorithms, right? You have some conditions and, it's written in a particular language and you solve a particular task or a problem, okay? Here, I don't know how many of you put together something from IKEA, right? But you have something like that. Then you have like the recipe, like I was saying here, if this is the chocolate cake. Here's like doing your laundry, okay? So, and then this up here at the top just talks an example of what you have already been doing, right? You already have like a, quote unquote, a recipe or algorithm to convert binary to decimal, okay? So these steps here, this is pretty much what we taught in class on how to convert a binary to decimal, okay? So I won't go over that again. Okay, well, so over here, this is one of those things where it's a free-for-all, right? Everybody just kind of jams themselves into here and, when you get out of this little circle of hell, who knows, right? So what they're saying is probably a bad algorithm. Yeah, that doesn't look too good, okay? Actually, I'm looking at this picture. It looked like someplace in China or something. But anyway, yeah, it's one of those things where the rules are not really set, right? It's just like a free-for-all, right? So that's probably not a great algorithm there. Okay, so what is an algorithm versus like a heuristic process? The long and short of it, a heuristic process is basically like a shortcut. Okay, so some of you may know the rule of 72, right? Basically, like how long does it take to double your money given whatever interest rate that you have, right? So you divide that interest rate into 72 and that gives you a ballpark idea of like how long it takes to double your money, okay? So it's not super precise, but it's a ballpark. It gives you a quick rule of thumb, let's say. And so something like that is called like a heuristic, okay? Versus an algorithm, which would basically give you the exact steps to say, okay, this is how long it would take for X interest rate to double your money, okay? And it'll be pretty exact and it'll be reproducible and, all that kind of stuff, right? So a heuristic is more like, yeah, just a quick thing, divide the interest rate into 72. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of sort of the difference between algorithms and heuristic. Okay. Okay, so what are the steps for creating an algorithm? Well, like I said up earlier, a couple more pages, like, well, what's your input? What do you need to put in there? Okay, if I kind of continue with that analogy of the recipe, you need the ingredients, right? Whatever the food ingredients are, the herbs, spices, whatever, right? Those are your input, and how much of that do you need? Okay. Well, what's the output, right? So in this one, talking about algorithmic computer batting average, let's say, but let's go back, let's stick with the recipe thing, right? That one, I think, was talking about making a chocolate cake, right? So I'm gonna make a single, maybe double layer chocolate cake, right? That's the output, okay? So this kind of goes to this point, right? Output precision, okay? So you can't be too vague and kind of just say, yeah, a pinch of salt, right? Or something like that, right? So be a little bit more precise. That makes it more reproducible, right? If I have an algorithm that says a pinch of salt, right? Your pinch of salt could be different than my pinch of salt. And so we could end up with different output, right? So ideally, when you have a good algorithm, given the same inputs, you should have the same output all the time, okay? It shouldn't be like, if I do it, if I do the algorithm versus you do the algorithm, we come up with different output, okay? So reproducible. Yeah, I can't pronounce this, definiteness, okay? So, it's basically, making each thing discrete, okay? So specifying the sequence for transforming your input into your output, okay? So it's very tangible things, unlike that algorithm for this, right? There's no real discrete steps here, right? It's kind of just winging it here, going into the circle. Okay. So yeah, creating the discrete steps, I would say, okay. Right, and then how effective, right? Yeah, so the agent, right, or the computer must be able to perform each step without outside help, okay, or extraordinary powers, let's say, right? And this goes again to the point of like, kind of having like this reproducible or self-contained type of process to do your work, okay? If you require other types of things to achieve this task, again, it becomes like very difficult to reproduce consistently. And then finiteness, this is what I was saying, where you don't want to get into an infinite loop, essentially, right? So you want to come up with a specific criteria to say this thing is done, right? Let's say, going back to the recipe, you have a cake, nice and fluffy, double layer cake, whatever, right? That's like your criteria to say you've delivered the output of this algorithm. It can't be something like calculate pi, right? That goes out to infinity and you never get an answer eventually, right? So you might have to do something like, well, give me pi to 6 decimals or something like that. Yeah, so that's kind of what it's talking about here, about the infinite loop problem, okay? Yeah, specifying at different levels of detail, but it still doesn't take away from you having some level of discrete criteria for your input and your success criteria for the algorithm to come out, right? So yeah, you can go at different levels, but still you can't take away from like you having a discrete output from an algorithm. Okay. Yeah, so you can use like functions that that you've learned from before, right? So a computer, there are certain things that it knows right? How to do math, essentially, right? And you would build on that, right? You wouldn't have to re-specify those steps at a detailed level. Like you wouldn't have to explain to a computer, or you wouldn't have to put into your algorithm, oh, this is how you add 1+1. Okay. All right. So this is like what this part here means. Assume the use of familiar functions and algorithms. Right. So there's a certain point, like if you're not able to do that, then you have to go all the way to the lowest level and you probably kill yourself, right? It's just too much, right? So there are certain things that, it's just a given that it's out there, right? How to add 1+1, right? So you're not going to have to specify that for the algorithm, okay? Like if I tell you, like for your recipe, you have to break some eggs, separate out the yolk and stir it and whatever, there's an assumption that you actually know how to do that. You don't actually have to spell it out to say, oh, this is how you break an egg. This is how you separate the yolk or whatever, right? So you have to make those type of assumptions. Okay. And this is going back to what I was saying before, right? So your algorithms can solve the same problem differently. And they add this part about like the solutions can take different types of time to do the calculation or space, like memory. But the output should be equal, right? So let's say, you going back to the cake algorithm, right? So if you want to create the cake, maybe I have like this, super bake oven that just cranks out the cake in no time flat. And there's like maybe a slow bake oven that's also going to be able to make the cake. Okay. And you gotta suspend your reality a little bit, but theoretically, I would have a different recipe, right? But if I'm trying to achieve the idea of like a cake coming out as my output, then that's what I want, right? I can't have like one algorithm produce like a mushy cake and then another algorithm produce like a very overdone cake or something, right? So you would have to have some different algorithm because you're using some different hardware, let's say, to adjust for that, right? But you're still targeting the same output there. So the algorithms can be all taking the same ingredients, right, for the cake, but they're maybe using a different machine, right? In our case, maybe a different computer, right? A different piece of hardware. And then the output, the desired output should still be the same, okay? And then that would make them kind of valid algorithms to do the same problem, okay? So you just have to kind of tweak it a little bit, tweak the algorithm a little bit to account for things like using different hardware. But ultimately, the solution, the output should be the same. Okay. All right. So this is just like a little thing that I guess we used to do when like I was teaching live classes, but you can maybe visualize this, kind of just picture you're in a classroom, and if everybody stands up, right, and every single person assigns yourself the number 1, right, and then you see someone else that's standing up, right, and then you take that person and you add your number to the other person's number and store the result somewhere, maybe on a piece of paper or whatever, right, and then one person will sit down and one person will stay up, okay, and then if you're still standing, go back to step 3. So if you picture all of the things I just said there, what do you think that will do? Okay. I'll give you a second, or you can pause this, right? Think about that. If you think about it, what it's essentially doing is you're totaling up the number of people that's in the class, right? So you keep on going through until essentially almost everybody is sitting down except for one person, right? And that one person would have accumulated all of the number ones from everybody else. And therefore you would have the total number of people in the class. So this is an algorithm to count the number of people in the class. Is it the only algorithm that would count the number of people in the class? No, right? You can think of other ways how you can achieve the same thing, right? Maybe, starting from the bottom front row, you would start off with 1, the person next to you would go to 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth, wrap itself around, and then you would end up with the total number of people, right? So that's a different algorithm, but still achieves the same result, okay? So just a quick little algorithm that we used to do in class, okay? This is kind of goofy little thing for the friendship algorithm. You can kind of follow this. This kind of might be helpful as we go into flowcharts and stuff like that. So what is a flowchart? Okay, so a flowchart is something that we kind of put down to help us, lay out logically like what we want an algorithm to do, right? So flowcharts, algorithm, this is why we're talking about a flowchart here. It's a part of you kind of organizing your thoughts to build out an algorithm, okay? So these symbols are important here, okay? So this symbol here means I'm gonna start my algorithm, my program, okay? So this is like an oval shape here, okay? So within the oval shape, in this case, we'll say start, right? But when you get done with everything, then it would say end, okay? And then you have arrows to kind of show you the direction of the logic, right? So from the start symbol, you would have an arrow that goes, let's say goes down, okay? And then you have this parallelogram here, right? And this is for your input or your output. What's your input? Could be your mouse, could be your keyboard, something like that, right? I'm inputting my name, let's say, right? So that's your input here, okay? Not your only thing, right? You obviously can take things electronically from other programs or whatever, but for the purpose of this class, let's just say your input is maybe your keyboard, okay? Your process could be add some numbers together, right? Whatever I took as my input, I will feed that into my process and I can do something with it, right? Like I said, maybe I add some numbers together. And then based on that, I would have a decision, right? And this is a diamond shape for the decision. And you could only have a yes or no, or up or down. It's like two directions it can be. You don't want to make it more than two, right? For the purpose of this class. So, for example, I could take in some numbers and then I'll add them together in this rectangle, this process, and then I would feed that into my decision and say, okay, is the sum of all my numbers greater than 10? If it's not greater than 10, go left. If it is, then go right, okay? So that's a yes or a no to a question. Is my number greater than 10? Okay, my summed up number, is that greater than 10? Okay. All right. So this just kind of talks through what I just talked about here. Okay. And so note these things here, right? Your start, that oval shape, there's one line out, one arrow line out. Your end only has one line in. Okay. Your input, output, and process, you have one line in, one line out. One line in, one line out means these arrows here. Okay. And then the decision. This is what I was saying before. Remember, I was saying it's either yes or no, black or white, whatever, right? So it's one line in. So my data coming in, let's say it's a number, okay? And then I'm saying, is it greater than 10, right? It's either yes or no, right? So that's my two lines out here, right? So pay attention to that because that's another concept that people seem to tend to get confused on when they're doing their flow charts here, okay? And then within the symbol, you can have like little statements, could be pseudocode, right? And we'll talk about pseudocode later. And it will basically say, add ABC, right? So whatever is the values that's in ABC, I'm gonna add them together, right? So short description of the statement for the computer to accomplish, okay? So there's another sample flow chart. Okay, so this is talking about, okay, it's talking about Facebook, right? So you enter this into your browser, that's your IO, okay? Your page loads up, okay? So that's your process, right? So remember this parallelogram, this would be a rectangle, right? And then you have your login page, right? Now you're gonna put in your ID and your password, it's your IO. And then is this a valid password and ID, right? So that's your decision. So it's only two things, either it's valid or it's not valid, right? So if it's valid or okay, in this case, not valid, then you have like an error screen. It'll say blah, 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 login, not correct. Then if it's valid, then it will say, yeah, this is your homepage, right? And then you're good, okay? So what does that look like here? Right? So this is what we talked about. This is kind of like your pseudo code here. Okay. It's not quite like the pseudo, like not quite like the pseudo code that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but kind of it, right? And then more importantly, on the right-hand side, you can see your flow chart. Right, look at this. It's actually color coded to make it even simpler to distinguish, right? But look at the oval shape for your start and end. You have your parallelograms for your IO, your input output, and then you have your rectangles for where you're doing some processing, right? And then you have your decision, which is this diamond here. Is it a valid password or not? Okay, so this is pretty straightforward flow chart utilizing all the shapes. So do try to understand this part. Okay. And this one is basically just talking about a Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion. Okay, and then the second one is talking about calculate your pay given however many hours you work, right? And then of course you have like overtime and stuff like that in there. Okay, so here's a flow chart for doing your Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion. Okay, don't mind this part on the right-hand side. We'll be covering that when we get into your JavaScript. But look here on the left, right? Your start, okay? You're inputting the Fahrenheit and then your rectangle to do your calculation for Celsius, and then your output in Celsius, and then the end. Okay, so kind of a simple algorithm, but that's what it is. Okay, there's another one that is calculating your total pay given your hours that you worked, right? So here's your start. How many hours did you work? What's the rate of pay that you have? And then you calculate that in this rectangle. Total pay is hours times the pay rate. And then your output, your total pay. Maybe that goes to your monitor or something like that. Now you modified this rate of pay given some overtime. Now you're going to factor in overtime here. So now you have your input, same thing, right? But now you have like a little bit of a fork here where you have this diamond that says if the hours is greater than 40. Okay, so if it's greater than 40, this is how you're going to calculate it to account for your overtime hours. If it's not, then you're going to just go over here to the straight up hours times your pay rate, and then goes down to here, right? Now, I know essentially it doesn't really matter if you work less than or more than 40 hours. Let's say you work less than the 40 hours, then essentially it would just be zeroing out the second part for the overtime there. So you don't necessarily need to create a fork to do this, but this is just more to illustrate the idea of forking for overtime. Okay, so yes, you're going to do this algorithm. No, you're going to do this one down here. Okay, so like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to do it that way. You can just make it one calculation to handle overtime or no overtime. But we did this just to illustrate this idea of a decision and having this branch here like this. Okay, now this will conclude this part here. This will go into more of the JavaScript, and it doesn't really, we don't really go into the pseudocode here. So I think I'm just gonna bring that up in the next lecture. I want to cut this lecture a little bit shorter. It's already gone quite a bit. and then we'll pick up JavaScript, and I'll mention a little bit about pseudocode also. All right, thank you.